Hey, y'all, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. The thing that people say to me the most often is, gosh, BA, I can't believe you do this show every single day. And the one thing I always say in response is, you actually have no idea how easy it is to do a Georgia show every day because there is always something going on, even in a time in which it seems like there's less going on out of nowhere. The JT Daniels news, I think it's really fun and exciting. A lot of unanswered questions. We'll deal with those over the course of our program today. But one way or another, Georgia is better for having added a former five-star quarterback that has Power 5 starting experience to its roster. It's better for that, even if we're not quite sure exactly how Daniels will be used and when we'll see him eligible and on a football field for the Dogs. So we will cover all of that. Jeff Sentell, his opinions on this. I've got a bold prediction for Georgia and JT Daniels on today's show, at least in some form or fashion I do. I'm going to solicit your help on something here on the program today there as well. So a lot of ground to cover. It's a great Friday. Good to have you with us. Dogs doing big business. We'll cover it all here on DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Kroger. It begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought
to you by
Kroger.
For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
My good friend and colleague, Jeff Sentell, who, by the way, will join us in a few minutes here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger today, joked with me yesterday that if you watch the show on video or if you listen to the podcast, you'll see the headline. It's our description of what the show is going to be. And yesterday's headline was something to the effect of UGA and its drama-free recruiting. The point that I made on yesterday's show is Georgia very quietly has been putting together what would seem to be another elite class, but for the most part not doing it in quite as noisy a fashion as other programs are, for the most part of avoiding some of the drama that's been out there with other programs. And lo and behold, when I say that, just a few minutes really after we got off the air, all of a sudden some pretty intense drama erupted on the Georgia scene as former five-star quarterback, a guy that was a freshman starter at USC, in the transfer portal now for a while. We had even on this show sort of speculated where he might go because the name JT Daniels resonates with college football fans. And lo and behold, JT Daniels is coming to Georgia, that becoming official yesterday. Now, I pride myself, I think, on being pretty good at knowing how UGA fans are going to feel about certain things because I are one. I am a UGA fan, so I feel like I have pretty good finger on the pulse, typically speaking, of how fans are going to react, what people are going to think about any given situation. Admittedly, though, the reaction both inside DawgNation and kind of outside the bubble of DawgNation, the reaction to the JT Daniels news has been a little bit different than I would have expected. I treat it as great news, even if I'm not quite sure exactly how it's all going to work out. Some Georgia fans have not necessarily treated it that way. Frankly, some even media figures have kind of not treated it that way, and I don't quite understand that. I've watched all this unfold over the last, about 18 hours or so, and I think that what I've seen kind of emerge in the immediate aftermath of JT Daniels announcing that he's coming to Georgia are a few myths. And I guess I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4 of these, 4 things that I think are fiction. And I'm going to try to sort of speak some facts to what I believe ultimately is fiction, whether it be from a Georgia fan, from a media guy, or whatever else. I think there's something that's going to be said in regards to this. And, you know, this is not necessarily mean-spirited on the people who are saying these things, and it's not intentionally wrong. I just think it's misunderstood in terms of what all this is for Georgia. Let me start with this, a narrative that I've seen from a lot of UGA fans. This came up during the comment section yesterday when we did our Cover 4 broadcast, all the DawgNation guys getting together to do that. I've seen some of this in responses to me on Twitter. It's some form of this. Well, I'm surprised that Georgia's bringing in JT Daniels because UGA is already loaded in its quarterback room. I've seen a lot of that from Georgia fans of, my gosh, Georgia's quarterback depth is already well established. Why does it need to bring in a JT Daniels? That's an argument in favor of guys we haven't seen yet. Dwan Mathis, we've seen him in a uniform. I haven't really seen him, fully ready to go yet, although it sounds like he is there now. That's touting Carson Beck, who's a 4-star arrival for the class of 2020, but once again, a guy we haven't really seen very much of yet, to say nothing of the other quarterbacks on the roster. And the one thing that you should understand about me is, and if you really think about this, I hope that you'll acknowledge this is true. I am very consistent on this point. I don't pretend to know if anybody can play until we see them actually out there doing that. In other words, I'm not Davey day trade. I'm not one of these guys going around buying this stock, selling this stock because I think I know what the stock's going to do. My personal investing belief, you should trust your own experts on this, but my personal investing belief is that on any given day, any stock is just as likely to go up as it is go down, and I kind of plan my investing around that. Safer stuff, index funds, things like that, S&P 500, that's just the way I sort of choose to go. You should consult your own experts. You should do what they tell you to do or do what you want to do, but that's personally what I choose to do, and it's worked out pretty well thus far. The same thing is true for football as well. When it comes to 4-star this, 5-star that, when it comes to the individual names themselves, I'll never pretend to know who's going to be good and who's going to be not. In fact, the people that know me the closest here at DawgNation know that I operate on the assumption that numbers are always more important than names. Is Carson Beck going to be good at Georgia, or is he going to be good in college football anywhere? Maybe, but I'm not quite so sure. Same thing for Dwan Mathis. Could he be good? Obviously, you see the potential. Will he be? No one really knows. It's not a perfect science. Therefore, if you want to ensure yourself of having a good quarterback, once again, operating on the assumptions that numbers are more important than names, if you want to ensure yourself the best chance of having a good quarterback, then you put as many names into that competition as possible, as many bodies in that competition as possible. And if we were to assume for a second that all these quarterbacks, the ones currently on Georgia's roster prior to JT Daniels, I'm talking about Jamie Newman and Stetson Bennett and Dwan Mathis and Carson Beck, if we are to assume that they're all equally likely to succeed, just for the sake of conversation, and you bring in a JT Daniels, and we'll assume that he's also equally likely to succeed as the rest of the guy. Just by making that assumption alone, I think you've increased your chances of having a successful, effective quarterback by 20%. Now listen, if you get a chance to add to your chance of success at the quarterback position by that significant a margin, if you can improve your chances of success by 20%, you take that. You take that opportunity, because when you pair a successful quarterbacking play with a program that has run the football really well, a program that we expect to play really good defense, adding to the likelihood that eventually you'll have a successful quarterback, whether it be in 2020 when he's eligible or 2021 when he's eligible, obviously you take that. So that's the first, I think, fiction that's been out there that has to be spoken against. Now, the other one kind of comes from outside the bubble of DawgNation for a moment. There's some version of this. Well, Georgia gets all these 5-star quarterbacks, but they don't do anything with them. How many times have you heard that? David Hale, ESPN writer. Well, Georgia had 5-star Jacob Eason and 5-star Jake Fromm, or at least close to 5-star. 5-star Justin Fields. And now you got 5-star JT Daniels coming in. But what does Georgia do with them? Georgia doesn't develop them. Georgia doesn't win national championship. And listen, a lot of this kind of centers around what happened at Georgia from, like, say, 2016, 2017, 2018. But just mentioning the first of those 5-star names, I think, is the explanation for why Georgia is trying to stack its quarterback room as deeply as it's tried to do that. This is not to take a jab at Jacob Eason, but the truth is, after having been a 5-star quarterback, Gatorade Player of the Year, Jacob Eason came in at Georgia as a true freshman, no easy task in the SEC, and he was kind of okay, right? He completed fewer than 60% of his passes, and then he got injured. Jake Fromm came in, and Jacob Eason saw a better chance for him somewhere else, and he went to Washington. Washington's a really strong coaching staff, a really good program, a little easier schedule, and with all due respect to Jacob Eason, he was still kind of just okay. The NFL draft scouts, when he entered the NFL draft this year, kind of gave Eason a little bit of a lukewarm response. Eason, who may go on to have a great pro career, and I'm rooting for him, I hope that he does, but the presence of Eason is the proof of everything that I'm saying right here. You don't know of any of these guys who's going to be good and who's not, because Eason, coming out of high school, had the look of a can't-miss prospect. And yet you still want other quarterbacks around him just in case that can't miss somehow accidentally does. And then obviously the dark cloud that hangs over all of this from the national media perspective is what happened with Justin Fields. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The Justin Fields situation at Georgia defines Kirby Smart for now. But that Justin Fields situation is not going to define him forever. Eventually you move on. You add more quarterbacks. Georgia's in the process of doing this right now. We saw the same thing unfold with Nick Saban, who once won national championships with A.J. McCarron, but ultimately will be remembered at Alabama for what he did with Tua Tagovailoa. Same thing to the other effect is probably true for Mark Richt, who initially had David Green, DJ Shockley, used them both to the tune of SEC championships. And ultimately he's probably defined for not winning a national championship when he had Matthew Stafford, when he had Aaron Murray. The point here is, It's what happens later for Kirby Smart when it comes to quarterbacks that'll ultimately tell the story about how he's remembered there at UGA. Eventually, the Justin Fields saga is just going to be a distant memory. Two more quick fictions that I want to kind of push back on here for a moment. It came up yesterday during our Cover 4 broadcast of, well, maybe the decision to bring in JT Daniels is evidence that Georgia's not happy with Jamie Newman. Now, I think this is ridiculous because former five-star quarterbacks who have starting experience at the Power 5 level, you can't order those things on Amazon Prime. This is not a, in-the-moment, instantaneous decision you make where all of a sudden you get cold feet on Jamie Newman, who we've been presuming is the 2020 starting quarterback for UGA, and therefore you bring in an insurance policy like JT Daniels. Daniels is the kind of guy that essentially would have had his choice of 90-something% of all the programs in college football. There's almost no program out there that wouldn't take a JT Daniels had they had a chance to bring him in. That's a long-range recruit. The odds are Georgia's been talking to JT Daniels for quite some time, well before it had any opportunity to make any kind of evaluation on Jamie Newman. The truth is, my prediction is, whether Daniels is ruled eligible for 2020 or not, my prediction is that Jamie Newman, assuming he stays healthy, is still the most likely starting quarterback for Georgia this upcoming season. Does that mean that Jamie Newman will have as great a year as, say, David Pollack projects him to have, predicting he'll be a first-round pick this upcoming season? I'm not going to make that prediction one way or another. But given what I think I know about both guys right now, I think that Newman, for now, is probably still the slightly better prospect. But as I've been saying, that's just an opinion, not necessarily something you ought to put a ton of stock in. But to kind of finish all this off, me saying that I'll, for this year, potentially take Newman over Daniels is not to be taken to mean that I don't think that JT Daniels is still a pretty impressive prospect, because the final work of fiction or misunderstood aspect of this JT Daniels story is because when he played at USC in 2018, his full season, the start of that year, and didn't do particularly well, 14 touchdowns, 10 or 11 interceptions, something along those lines, that somehow that means, well, he's not as good as he was advertised to be coming out of high school. The truth is, USC in 2018 was probably a mess. Daniels himself, as a reclassified, should have been high school senior playing as a college freshman. That's a pretty difficult task. I think that USC has found itself a pretty good offensive coordinator now in Graham Harrell. They didn't have Harrell in 2018. That was a revolving door of coaches involving T. Martin and head coach on the hot seat and everything else. I think there is still a really good chance that Daniels himself is a really good prospect. Doesn't guarantee he'll have success at Georgia, nor does it guarantee that Georgia will find its high-level quarterback here over the next couple of seasons. But the presence of Daniels, to go along with Newman this year, Brock Vandegrift next year, Beck and Mathis, and for now Stetson Bennett there as well, the presence of all these quarterbacks just makes it more likely. You're putting the odds in your favor, and if you're Kirby Smart, that's about all you can ask for. Shrewd move on his part. Georgia's better today for having JT Daniels. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Great to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Huge thanks to Kroger for making the show possible today. They've got some great deals for you right now in the bakery, which is always putting good stuff out there. Deli stuff, too. And it's National Donut Day coming up on June 5th. This is a fun thing here. You can get 12-count glazed donuts, just 2 for $6. Now, my kids, my daughter especially, loves donuts. This might be the kind of thing we're taking advantage of there. Pretty good deal on that for National Donut Day. Also, get Boar's Head Oven Gold Turkey, just $8.99 a pound, and fully cooked baby back ribs, $9.99 a pound. So we love the Boar's Head meats. We love those great deli items like the baby back ribs there at Kroger, so make sure you check that out. Great savings at the Kroger closest to you. Hope you will see all of that. We're going to get Jeff Sentell here coming up in just a moment. As you might imagine, a lot on JT Daniels with Jeff here in just a bit. Let me give you a bold projection for a moment, though. This is a prediction sure to be wrong, but it's one I'm comfortable making, and I think ultimately the point that I'm going to make here by making this prediction, I think, is the only illustration you need for why Georgia's bringing in JT Daniels, former five-star quarterback, former starter at USC. Here's my bold prediction. Georgia will be the preseason number 1 team in 2021. It's a post-Justin Fields world at Ohio State. It's a post-Trevor Lawrence world at Clemson. DJ Uiagalelei will obviously have high expectations at quarterback. I'm assuming he'll be the starter there. But when you look at, my gosh, junior season Nolan Smith, junior season George Pickens, junior season Trayvon Walker, junior season Nakobe Dean, still very deep in talent along the offensive line, including the great work that Matt Luke did in this 2020 recruiting cycle. Compare that to what's going on in Alabama. Compare that to what's going on in Ohio State. Compare that to what's going on at Clemson. Georgia will be the preseason number one team. Now, I know what the immediate pushback on that is. Well, I don't want to be preseason number one. I want to be postseason number one. I don't want that rat poison. That's superstitious nonsense. If you can be the number one team in the country to start a season, of course you want to do that because it speaks to the likelihood of you being at that spot there at the end of the year. So I don't know how good ultimately JT Daniels is going to be, but I know how much more likely the presence of a quarterback of this caliber has made Georgia, if you're following me, and if that makes sense. It remains to be seen if ultimately he'll ever be the starting quarterback. He could be overtaken by a Carson Beck, could be overtaken by DeJuan Mathis, could be overtaken by an incoming freshman like Brock Vandagriff. Anything is a possibility. It certainly seems like he lost the starting job at USC, so that door is at least open. But the presence of someone with experience probably matters. It will be viewed as Georgia more in the hunt for a national championship than it otherwise would have been with a quarterback by comparison that has a lot less experience. So if you want to know why Georgia brought in JT Daniels, ultimately I believe it's more about 2021 than 2020. If I had to predict, I think there's actually a decent chance that maybe he doesn't get the waiver for immediate eligibility this year because I think the political winds are just blowing in a different direction right now. But for 2021, to have a player that has some starting experience, has spent some time at Georgia, boy, all of a sudden that looks pretty interesting. Season opener against Clemson with a guy that's played before, assuming that Daniels wins that starting job. I think the response to Daniels at Georgia will be strong. I believe it'll be the preseason number one team in 2021. I'd love to find out what you think about this. You can hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. Pop some comments in the comment section on Facebook and YouTube. And I'd love to hear what Jeff Sentell thinks about this as well. Let's talk to him right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Jeff Sentell, who was all over the story yesterday for DawgNation.com. Really good reporting. Also really interesting insight into how Daniels fits into the situation at Georgia. Jeff, I want to just kind of cover all of this in really no particular order. So let me start where I just finished. I think this is a story about 2021, regardless of how 2020 plays out for Georgia. I think this is the preseason number one team in the country for next season. In the presence of Daniels, I think it's what opens the door for that possibility. And I'm saying that regardless of the outcome of this particular season. Let me begin right there. How do you see that? Does Daniels make that big of an impact for Georgia in terms of the projections for the following season?
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. And I guess, Brandon, you used the term political win. So I guess you would have the conservative approach and say that you feel that this is not a referendum on anybody on the current roster. This is a referendum on the future. I guess I'll kind of look at this a little bit more liberally than you do, and I think this is simply an example of big picture thoughts here. I think this is Kirby Smart being Kirby Smart. I think if anytime he has a chance to add a player like JT Daniels to his roster, then I think he would jump at it. We got to remember natural talent, what these young men looked like coming out of high school. Clearly, it was JT Daniels in every way. I mean, if you polled a bunch of recruiting analysts together and said, "Give me your top 10 quarterbacks that have came out over the past 5 years," I can guarantee you that JT Daniels' name would be among those top 5, top 10 names. Jamie Newman had a different path to his status right now in all those lofty Pro Football Focus rankings, and it's just like this, Brandon. If here's a good example. And I know the quarterback position might be different because only one guy can be on the field, but I don't think Kirby Smart looks at it that way. I think he looks at it like who's the leading returning rusher in college football for this next season? I think last time I checked, it's Chuba Hubbard out of Oklahoma State.
Sure.
If Georgia had the chance through transfers, graduates, or whatever to bring a Chuba Hubbard into the program, they would look to make that move because it just makes your roster better. I think. When you discuss 2021, the thing that immediately pops up into my mind is Georgia's going to play Clemson in Charlotte. And wouldn't it be odd if Georgia had the more veteran, the better quarterback room than the vaunted Clemson Tigers going into that game, when it certainly didn't seem that way a year ago. And I think a big point for people to understand is these guys are doing some semblance of install right now. They're doing some semblance of Zoom meetings. They're installing. They're walking through the Monken offense. They're walking through as much as they possibly can, according to the NCAA's staples right now and stipulations. They're starting to do as much as they can digitally in terms of preparing teams for that offense. And I just think that Georgia, they realize that this program can win now. It's set up to win now. They just need to make sure that the guy they bring in at quarterback is the right quarterback. And, everybody's going to talk about quarterbacks, and people are making smart points on both sides of the aisle about this. All I'm thinking is with what's happening here with Georgia, and we can just look at past history, I think Georgia's doing everything it can to make sure it will have the right quarterback under center when those big ball games are played in December.
Yeah, I mostly agree with everything that you're saying. Let me take it a step further, though. You said this is kind of a classic Kirby Smart move. It certainly has the look of that. But, Jeff, I'm going to tell you this. I don't believe there's a team in the country that would turn down JT Daniels if it had a chance to get him. There are teams that have deeper quarterback rooms than Georgia does. Therefore, Daniels may not have viewed those locations as quite as attractive. But if a Clemson, even though it's got quarterbacks, could have gotten to Daniels, I believe they would have wanted him. In Oklahoma, that already has a Spencer Rattler, I believe they would have still wanted JT Daniels. People say, well, he's not quite as mobile as this guy or that guy. I think when you look at the overall talent profile, there are about 130 teams in Division I high-level FBS football. All of them would take JT Daniels if they had a chance to get him, no matter what their current quarterback situation was.
Yeah, I want to make sure, Brandon, we write it a lot, but, heck, everybody listens to DawgNation Daily. So, I want to make sure people understand this. Last year, there was the talk, and it was real, that Georgia was trying to get Carson Beck to graduate early. Remember Carson Beck? I believe he commits in March, April to Georgia. And there's the talk, there's the thinking, because Georgia's quarterback room was entirely different. There was the thinking, okay, online classes, okay, summer school. Can he give up 8 weeks of his summer, of his spring, and enroll and graduate early and enroll early? There was the possibility that he could do that. And then he would come in to be a backup or another option for Georgia should something happen with Jake Fromm. Well, that's what JT Daniels did. And there wasn't his first year at USC, and there wasn't a Jake Fromm in the way. So JT Daniels won that job. And I know when everybody thinks about this, they say, oh, well, look at the numbers that he had. Look at the numbers Keaton Slovis had. Look at the numbers JT Daniels had. 14 touchdowns, 2,600 yards, 10 interceptions. Those are all there. Those are all paper. Those are forever. And that's kind of what the first or second or third impressions about JT Daniels. People start going, well, couldn't beat out that guy. The guy came in next year, had a much better season. So that says something about that 5-star rating for JT Daniels and how good of a quarterback he can be. Well, I think even Mike Griffith, when he brought in Ryan Young from USC, their beat reporter, he basically told Mike on our DawgNation platforms yesterday that if JT Daniels would have been the quarterback with a much better supporting cast and system around him for 2019 USC, then the beat writer that covers USC felt that JT Daniels would have put up the exact same numbers that Keaton Slovis did a year ago.
You know how I feel about this when it comes to the quarterbacks, really any position. I'm not going to make a projection on how good Carson Beck's going to be, how good Dwan Mathis would be, how good even more playing time for Stetson Bennett would be. I'm not going to even make too much of a projection how Jamie Newman compares to those guys. I just want as many people in a competition as possible to ensure that you have a better result on the other end. And what I said before you joined us, Jeff, is by bringing in a guy like JT Daniels, it seems like you've just kind of increased by 25% your chance of finding a quarterback who's good enough to get you where you want to go simply by turning a 4-person competition into a 5-person competition. By the way, that's true in 2020 or 2021. Take Jamie Newman out of the mix for 2021, put Brock Vandegrift in. It's still kind of like adding that extra name in there so that when it's all said and done, you've just got someone who's a little bit more likely to get you down to where you want to go. And that's kind of my response to those who say, I can't believe Georgia's bringing in JT Daniels because it already had so many other quarterbacks. I like Dwan Mathis. I'm a fan of his. I love the message that his father gave to the DawgNation Facebook page yesterday. I like Carson Beck. I love the way that he earned his reputation by doing well in 11-on-11 action in the state of Florida going back to his junior season. But I'm not going to speak with confidence about what either one of those guys are going to be at the college level until I've seen it yet. That's why you want to have, I think, as many people in a competition as you can possibly get.
Here's what I want. I want to predict. I want to predict some things right now with Brandon Adams. And I know you'll tell me your unvarnished opinion, and hope everybody else does too on the feed. What Georgia has set up is a crucible of competition at quarterback room. Let's say something haymakery happens. Let's say Stetson's the quarterback. Let's say Carson Beck's the quarterback. Pick a name, anybody here. And if that guy comes through the furnace and Kirby Smart is trotting him out against Virginia week 1, what's everybody going to say? Most people will have to look at that and say, wow, never thought that Beck kid was going to take that job from so-and-so and so-and-so. Never thought that Mathis kid was going to come off that brain surgery and injury and just getting cleared, as our Mike Griffith just reported on the Georgia beat last night for DawgNation. And he won the job. That's going to be interesting news. That's going to be stunning news to some. But I think most people, most of DawgNation, when they see that jersey under center, they're going to go, man, he must be really good because look at that competition he went through to get that job. Most will feel empowered to know that Georgia will have a superior trigger man under center, the guy that comes out of that competition. And nothing is going to be handed to anybody, no matter what all those PFF ratings and no matter how some of those highlights on YouTube of Jamie Newman show the world that it should be this guy or that guy.
So let me try to explain my opinion on this. So while I'm uncomfortable making projections for players that haven't played yet, when it comes to comparing two guys who have played, I think I'm on a little bit safer ground on that. Daniels has played at USC. Jamie Newman has played at Wake Forest. Very different conferences, very different levels of competition for the most part, but it's a little safer comparison to make because we've seen both those guys play. With that in mind, even if Daniels is eligible this season, Jeff, my prediction would be, on the basis of what I've seen from both guys, that Newman still wins the starting job. As I said before you joined us, and as I said yesterday in our Cover 4 broadcast, I don't think the arrival of Daniels is a referendum on Jamie Newman. To me, in comparison to the two guys who have played at the major college level before, the two transfers here, I still view Newman as, I'll play it safe and say the more likely starter, but I'm tempted to want to say the far more likely starter, even if Daniels is ruled eligible for this upcoming season. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think you got to look at. I mean, this causes everyone to think very critically about both quarterbacks and their resumes. Because when you think about JT Daniels, I mean, Brandon, he's only 18, 19 years old still. And then you got Jamie Newman, who went through a redshirt year at Wake Forest, who is now a graduate transfer. In both of these guys, I want everybody to realize this. You know, the PFF ratings and the 5-star ratings, and right behind Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, I think it inflates the worth of both of these young men. Both of these young men were not instant stars. I mean, JT Daniels lost his job through injury to Keaton Slovis. Well, when you look at the Jamie Newman resume at Wake Forest, he redshirted. He didn't win a lot of his games as a high school quarterback, didn't have long playoff runs as a high school quarterback in North Carolina. He comes in, and then a true freshman, let's remember, Brandon, a true freshman beats him out his redshirt sophomore year at Wake Forest. And then that freshman has to give way to Jamie Newman, who has a brilliant redshirt sophomore season at Wake Forest to close that out. And then he starts wire to wire again for Wake Forest a year ago. I don't think neither one of these two men have one of those things that says, man, what they've done at the college level guarantees instant success at Georgia. Sure, Georgia's going to be different with the run game, the defense, the offensive line, and the wide receivers. But if you look at Daniels, straight up Daniels versus Newman, I think you're talking about a guy that's physically about 2 or 3 years older than Daniels, at least, when those are the comparisons that come up between Newman and Daniels. It just comes down to, Brandon, those guys, should he become immediately eligible, are going to compete their socks off in camp. I think Mathis and I think Daniel and Beck are going to have a lot to say out of that as well. And the guy that's QB1 coming out of fall camp at Georgia is going to have earned it. And I think that's the simplest thing I can say.
So let me say this about Newman for a second. When it comes to, like, the praise of him, the Pro Football Focus stuff doesn't really mean a ton to me because no one really knows how they're tabulating those numbers. And frankly, Pro Football Focus loved Jared Garantano going into last season, so their batting average isn't perfect when it comes to some of these numeric projections for the upcoming season. But what does matter to me when it comes to Newman is Jeff, you can go back and find NFL draft love for Jamie Newman on the internet well before he ever made the decision to transfer to Georgia. Even in the midst of what was kind of an up and down career at Wake Forest, some good moments, some not so good moments, as you would expect, and kind of a middling program like there in Winston-Salem, there were still people who viewed Jamie Newman as a draft prospect even back then. David Pollack does not have the reputation of being an over-the-top, unabashed Georgia homer. In fact, some Georgia fans have said the opposite. Pollack goes on ESPN TV, the big network, the other morning, and said that he thinks that Jamie Newman will become a first-round pick. Pollack's not the kind of guy that kind of throws that out there just willy-nilly. He has not effusively always praised Georgia in the past, as plenty of other UGA fans would probably be pretty quick to point out here. So I guess it's just fair for me to say that when it comes to the love for Jamie Newman, the kind of nondescript pro football focused numbers, that's not the only source that's kind of touted Jamie Newman, which is part of the reason why I've actually kind of talked myself into, what I think he has a chance to be at UGA.
Yeah, those are when you couch your opinion not just on the metrics, and you listen to football people like David Pollack. Their opinion definitely has a lot of cement, a lot of concrete to stand upon. I mean, you look at things like that and you go, well, I can name a Georgia quarterback that was a lot highly rated as well a year ago as well about the NFL draft and projections, and that's what they are. The Daniels thing to me, and then we said this on our show. There are going to be one or two or three names that come out of this that are going to be happy with the way they performed in fall camp and where they stand in the Georgia pecking order at quarterback. Maybe only one or two. And there's going to be others that are not going to be happy where they stand in the pecking order at Georgia at quarterback. And that just means for the young fellows like Math or Beck or Mathis, then that might show them that they have a lot of work to do to compete to earn this job against guys that are, a little bit older, have a little bit more experience against them in college football. I think those are the things to think about there. You got to remember this, Brandon. This is what I keep coming on to. Those guys are going to get on the field with the Georgia team on the grass around the Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall at the same time. And that's going to go a long way. And Jamie Newman's been on campus. Jamie Newman he didn't get to go through a spring practice. And I think the lead, whatever lead that Jamie Newman might have had on a JT Daniels, is not as pronounced as some might think.
Let me finish with this. One of the names that we have not mentioned yet is Brock Vandegrift. What can you tell us about the way that the Vandegrift clan probably views this?
So got a chance to speak to that family yesterday, and they believe in competition, Brandon. They believe in, you got to remember this. When Brock Vandegrift was choosing his school, the school was Oklahoma. And Oklahoma, that's all you have to say. Oklahoma has more quarterbacks probably still than Georgia does. Or at least when you add in the guy coming in, Caleb Williams, for the 2021 cycle. So you think about Oklahoma and look at the other schools. You like Auburn, you like South Carolina. Tennessee was a school that was kind of in there a little bit. There wasn't a lot of the short list for Brock Vandegrift. Wherever he was going to go, there were going to be two or three dudes just like him, or the 2018, 2019, 2020 models of Brock Vandegrift the years prior. I think the thing you know about the Brock Vandegrift family, his dad's a longtime football coach. He understands competition. He understands that you got to get the best guys you possibly can. And they don't look at that as maybe we should reevaluate our landing spot there at Georgia at all. They just realize competition is going to be there wherever he's going to be, and he's going to need that in order to be the best football player he possibly can be. I
said I was going to let you go. Let me do one more thing. Here's what I ultimately believe. We can talk about Carson Beck, we can talk about DeWine Mathis, you can talk about Jamie Newman, JT Daniels, Brock Vandegrift, the 2021 commit, anybody that you want. Ultimately, I don't believe it's those quarterbacks' job to come in and make Georgia great. I believe it's Georgia's job to make those quarterbacks great. Find one that you can make great and really make him thrive. And so, to me, I think the thing that you got to say to punctuate this entire conversation is that all of this is not a referendum on the quarterback that comes into Georgia. It's a referendum on the current offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, Buster Faulkner, who I think is going to have a pretty big role here. Can these offensive coaches get something out of these guys? Because the current viewpoint of Georgia as kind of a failed offensive program, I think that Georgia took steps to push back against that in the offseason by getting rid of James Coley and by bringing in Todd Monken. I thought that Coley would have worked. I was glad to see him get the promotion before last season, but it clearly didn't work, and you had to move on from that. So no matter how many quarterbacks we mention here, Jeff, my belief is the most important name in this discussion is still Todd Monken, and Buster Faulkner is going to be working closely with him as an analyst. What do these guys get out of these quarterbacks? To me, that's the most important question, even in comparison to what do the quarterbacks bring into the program with them.
Yeah, and I guess I'll double down on something, Brandon, with this is, let's say that Jake Fromm would have returned to the program. I think, or if Georgia had a dominant quarterback like a Heisman Trophy contender, I think Georgia would have still brought in a JT Daniels for their room. And you see, and this is the main thing, Brandon, nobody has the team right now. There's no locker room voice that's swinging this way or that way for certain guys. I think I feel comfortable saying that, Brennan, it wouldn't surprise me if any of these names end up winning the quarterback job for the bulk of the 2020 season at Georgia. Wouldn't surprise me if a Beck did. Wouldn't surprise me if a Mathis did. Wouldn't surprise me if an eligible Daniels did. Or wouldn't surprise me at all if Jamie Newman held off all comers and kind of got this Georgia job, which everybody thought was handed to him back when he made the transfer to come in and be a one and done and be a first-round draft pick out of the University of Georgia. You see the way the guys on the team respond. Like there's the tweet that went out yesterday when JT Daniels came into the program, Brandon, and it was like, yeah, congratulations, welcome to the family, heck yeah. Because the way they look at it, that's like Georgia adding another defensive lineman or Georgia adding another wide receiver or Georgia adding another running back to the program. They know it's overall just going to make the team better. And I think, all those national pundits, Brandon, they said after this, man, Georgia has no problem recruiting quarterbacks. Georgia brings in another quarterback. Can they pick the right one this time? Are they going to make the right decision this time? I think this is a referendum on that when you look back at this 2020 season in Georgia's quarterback room going forward, I don't think anybody is ever going to say that Buster Faulkner, Todd Monken, Kirby Smart, Matt Luke, they didn't do all they can to make sure they had the best possible quarterback in Athens. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to have this new system, this new set of receivers who I think are going to be as crucial into making the quarterback as any component we're discussing today. And you're going to have them going against Georgia's salty number one, fired up defense. Did everybody see those comments that Monty Rice made this week about complacency? Sure. Brandon, this is if the way Georgia has built, I'm going to use one of your favorite terms, the Death Star program here. If the way Georgia has built this Death Star program, if all those combinations of offensive line, now coaching acumen, receivers, going against that defense every day, getting better, if that doesn't make Saturdays easier in the fall, then the foundational elements for Georgia's football program are out of whack. I don't think they're out of whack. I think that's what Alabama did for years on the way to their dynasty. And I think Georgia's going to have all the pieces to where the guy that comes out of this is going to be the man for Georgia. He's going to play great football for Georgia. And then, should football happen and an injury occur at the game's most important position, Georgia has some high-level risk management insurance with maybe 2 or 3 capable names behind him, able to come in and lead a drive. But remember we had these conversations last year, this time, when we had nothing to talk about. Hey, what happens if Jake Fromm gets hurt or he misses half the game against Tennessee? Who can come in and get that crucial SEC East win on the way to Jacksonville and facing the Gators? Now, when we pose that same question across DawgNation, I think the fan base is going to feel pretty empowered knowing that the guys behind whoever the eventual number one starter is are going to be able to get it done.
Jeff, really good stuff. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to reading a lot more from you on this topic at both the forum at forum.dawgnation.com and on the big side at dawgnation.com. And we'll enjoy the chance to chat with you again on our program again very soon as well.
Hey, Brandon, I guess I gave you a good, meaty day of content today, man. Enjoy, everybody.
Looking forward to it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I think it's very interesting what Jeff says there near the end of that conversation, that he's hearing naysayers about the Georgia program saying, hey, is Georgia going to make the right decision at quarterback this time? Listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The way the Justin Fields thing played out is not a great look for Georgia currently. It certainly seems like Georgia made the wrong decision because Fields went on to Ohio State, at least for last year, was better than what Georgia had at the quarterback position. But let me just be very clear about this, though. Had Georgia's offense functioned better last year, that comparison wouldn't have quite seemed so obvious. You see the perfect example of this at Ohio State. Ohio State let Joe Burrow go. Joe Burrow went to LSU and became the Babe Ruth of college football. And yet, for the most part, Ohio State's not viewed as a failure because of that, because they had a very effective offense with Dwayne Haskins, which was really the reason why Joe Burrow left. And then Justin Fields last season, not as good as Ohio State or as LSU, but plenty good enough. Yes, the way the Fields thing ended for Georgia was not a great look, but had the Georgia offense worked, no one would have cared about that quite as much. So it's not as if Georgia has made a series of bad decisions. They've made like 2 bad decisions, and really ultimately they've made one really bad decision that they've, I think, tried to mitigate this past offseason. The really bad decision was assuming that James Coley could step in and be an offensive coordinator. And the Georgia offense got worse last season with Coley than it had been with Chaney the last couple of years. Chaney wasn't always popular, but the offense was way worse with Coley than it had to be with Chaney. Jake Fromm, who had been a national championship game quarterback, SEC winning quarterback in his freshman season, regressed in his junior year. Georgia essentially wasted the last year of Jake Fromm in a UGA uniform because it had an ineffective offense. But listen, Georgia didn't just stand pat or sit on its hands, to mix metaphors. Georgia went out and hired Todd Monken, went out and brought a Buster Faulkner, who himself was a successful offensive coordinator at kind of that sort of group of 5 level. So, yeah, Georgia made a mistake. But listen, failure's not final. You learn from it, you move on. And, clearly Georgia's in a position to do that. The people who act like, Georgia's some irreparably broken offense, I think the people who want that to be true may end up being greatly, greatly disappointed. I could talk about this all day, but I need to talk about a couple of other things. One of the things that we'll get into a lot more next week, you can read about this now at DawgNation.com, but Kirby Smart speaking yesterday, and he spoke specifically about a few things involving Georgia, but a lot of what he said in terms of how the testing procedure is going to go on at UGA is really being taken as a template for the rest of the SEC. Smart's words yesterday on the testing procedure and testing folks when they come into the program and then testing them again if they show some symptoms while they're at UGA. This kind of got a lot of national attention because this is one of the first big-name guys we've seen speak out on this topic. Now, let me try to do the best I can to kind of explain this situation. For some people, the SEC's policy on this is going to be a little bit controversial because for people who act well, Georgia and most of the SEC programs are going to treat them as if they are well. In other words, they're going to test you at the beginning, but to my understanding, they're not going to test you again unless you appear to be sick. It's testing and monitoring. The word monitoring does a lot of heavy lifting there in that particular instance because obviously from society at large, we know that asymptomatic cases exist when it comes to the coronavirus, and in some cases, those asymptomatic cases can be what helps spread the disease. So from that standpoint, this is kind of how this is going to be viewed, that the SEC is doing a lot on the front end. There are some people who wish the SEC would do more on the back end, or really all of college football do more on the back end in terms of regular testing, trying to identify those asymptomatic cases. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. All I can tell you is from an opinion standpoint, I'm fine with how college football is choosing to treat this, the SEC in particular. For me, that opinion's based on the overall healthy outcomes for most young people, seemingly, when it comes to this. The fact that we've got a number of states, including those in the SEC footprint, who are reopening. Thus far, the mainstream media reports on that would suggest that things seem to be going fine. So the fact that the SEC, no pun intended, is intent to leave well enough alone and only test those that show symptoms for this, the best that I can understand all of this, I'm sort of fine with that the way that it is. But there are some people who are going to wish that the SEC was doing more testing on this. By the way, speaking of the coronavirus situation, that was interesting yesterday that an SEC state, the state of Texas, now that's mostly a Big 12 state, but it is part of the SEC footprint. The governor of Texas came out to say that starting in June, sporting events that take place in outdoor venues can have fans, up to 25% of the outdoor stadium's capacity. Given the fact that Major League Baseball right now seems to be kind of a mess, I'm not quite sure what the outdoor venues would be. I guess Texas Motor Speedway coming into play at some point in time over the summer. But if you're someone who wants fans in the stands this fall, and I do, someone being willing to go first ahead of college football is probably an important step in that direction. Texas seemingly has had good results thus far with its mitigation of the coronavirus, and Greg Abbott here, the governor, going to take the aggressive step of bringing back some fans into the stands. We no doubt will watch that and see how it goes. The last thing, as part of our SEC through, I saw where South Carolina coach Will Muschamp was on the Paul Feinbaum show, and the subject of his son, Jackson Muschamp, being on the Georgia roster came up. And I've always been fascinated by this because it is a little bit weird to think that, your son is a part of the program that you're obviously competing against. Had South Carolina not beaten Georgia last year, Muschamp may have lost his job last season. So that Georgia-South Carolina game has loomed pretty important. You've got your, prodigy? Is that what it's called? What the word is when someone's your son? Either way, let me just use a less fancy word. You've got your son now in the Georgia program, and he says, listen, we're not going to be talking about anything. We're not going to be sharing any kind of inside secrets or whatever. But in a weird way, it's kind of cool. I mean, the one thing that cannot happen anymore is certainly Will Muschamp can't negatively recruit against Georgia in terms of its development of quarterbacks. If he trusts his own quarterback son to go be a part of that Georgia roster, then it's going to be pretty hard for him to negatively recruit against that in the future. But nonetheless, Muschamp talking about his son Jackson and UGA there on the Feinbaum show yesterday, and we will make that your SEC see-through. We were typically going to do a kind of a Kroger kickoff here looking ahead to the weekend. No real official Kroger kickoff here today, but let me at least give a shout-out to all those of you getting ready to graduate and the great work that Kroger's doing there to get you ready for that. I know those parties are a little bit different this year, but listen, you can still have a great celebration, monitoring social distancing and everything else. And our friends at Kroger make that possible. Whether it be food, including an 8-piece fried or baked chicken, that's just 2 for $10. Party platters that start at $19.99, and all kinds of gift cards and things like that for the graduate gift there in your life. If you want to see all of the options and choices available to you, check out this website. It's Kroger.com/graduation. Kroger.com/graduation. All right, in the time we have left, I want to spend some time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, talking about something a little bit different. The other day, I got a tweet, and I thought this was really a very creative idea. And so I've been working on this the last couple of days. Sometimes I kind of work a little too slow, but I've been working on this, and I'm going to publish this, I think, tomorrow at DawgNation.com. Somebody asked me the question of, which UGA players are the most likely to lead the SEC in a statistical category for this upcoming season? And I thought, boy, that's pretty fun. And so I'm almost done with my list. I'm hoping that if you're listening radio podcast, maybe you'll hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, something like that, maybe you'll just put a comment in the comment section. The folks who are the most likely on the Georgia roster to potentially lead the SEC in a statistical category of this upcoming season. Now, there are a few of these that you would say just not likely to happen. For instance, let me give you a for instance. Georgia hasn't had a player lead the SEC in sacks since 2012. Georgia's top sack guy last season was Azeez Ojulari. He was just 13th in the SEC. Georgia's top sack guy in 2018 was DeAndre Walker, just 8th in the SEC. Roquan, even the great year he had in 2017, was just 12th in the SEC in sacks. So for the most part, when it comes to most likely statistical categories where Georgia has a league leader, you would say sacks probably not one of the ones that you would think of. Is it possible that Georgia has the leading rusher this season? You go back to 2017, Georgia had Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, 4th and 5th. That's kind of the best thus far in the Kirby Smart era. DeAndre Swift was 7th a year ago. Let me give you two that you may not be considering in this conversation. I'm hopeful that you'll give me a couple more. Here's the two that I've kind of zeroed in on as maybe the most likely to happen. I think there's a decent chance that Monty Rice leads the SEC in tackles this season. Georgia had a player lead the league in tackles in 2017. Obviously, that's Roquan Smith. Even if Monty's not the Butkus Award winner, it's still a possibility. Monty was 10th in tackles in the league a year ago, and last year's SEC leading tackler, Jacob Phillips, a linebacker from LSU, had been 11th in 2018. So there's a little bit of a precedent for kind of going from bottom part of the top 10 to league leader in tackles. Georgia had a player lead the league in tackles in 2017. That's probably a possibility. And frankly, for Monty, that may not be a huge stretch. Here's another one that may be a little bit surprising to you. I think there's actually a decent chance. Now, I would have said Jamie Newman here before, but now you have to say the UGA quarterback, just given the fact that we don't know what's going to happen with JT Daniels or anybody else as of yet. Believe it or not, I think there's a chance that the Georgia quarterback could lead the SEC in touchdown passes thrown. Last 3 years, Fromm was 4th in 2019, 2nd in 2018. third in 2017. Good teams have a tendency to throw a lot of touchdowns anyway, score a lot of touchdowns. So from that standpoint, don't sleep on the Georgia quarterback potentially doing a little more to maybe lead this league in touchdown passes thrown. So that's kind of where I am right now. Decent case to be made for the leading tackler. Relatively decent case to be made for the most passing touchdowns thrown. Can you make a case for George Pickens as the SEC's leading receiver? Jamar Chase certainly shows the path for that. Chase did not have nearly as good a season in 2018 as he ended up having in 2019. Pickens, who was 13th in receiving yards, could he maybe jump up there? There's a case to be made for that. Maybe a few others there as well. Like I said, I'd love to have you weigh in on this all the way around. And we appreciate you being here as a part of DawgNation Daily today, presented by Kroger. How about our Gator Hater Updater? Let's throw that up on the screen so I can give credit to that number because I don't remember what it is. Yeah, there you go. 1,308 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators been the Georgia Bulldogs. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. All right, good stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of one of the things I'm working on for the weekend is those potential statistical categories. Like I said before, you could make a decent case for leading tackler, decent case for passing touchdowns. It's not a huge stretch to say tackles for loss, even though Georgia's overall TFL numbers haven't been great. DeAndre Walker kind of shows you the way forward there on that. So that's kind of the non-JT Daniels thing that's on my mind for today. But I'm hoping that here in our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, we get a lot of really good JT Daniels comments because I think there's a lot to be hashed out here. And frankly, I know that not everyone's going to agree with everything that I've said because there are people who are really rooting for DeJuan Mathis or really rooting for Carson Beck or really rooting for Jamie Newman. You know, I get all that people have a tendency to sort of choose their guy. You know, ultimately, I just cheer for the team, and I think the team is better with the extra quarterback, whether he's eligible in 2020 or 2021. And if he is eligible in 2020, as I said before, I'll still put my chips down on Jamie Newman. So wide-ranging number of opinions from me. I'd love to hear you weigh in on this there as well. And, of course, big thanks to R.S. Andrews for making it all possible. Check him out online, rsandrews.com, especially when it comes to those, air conditioning systems. It's hot. I'm wearing a pullover right now because I didn't have anything else to put on today. But when it comes to, what I'm going to be wearing when I'm done here, it's T-shirts and shorts and maybe flip-flops for some of y'all. Listen, that means air conditioning working overdrive. But if you're worried that you're just not keeping your house cool enough, get some peace of mind with that $99 R.S. Andrews a tune-up. They'll get your system back to fresh spec and get you ready for the summer to come. So good stuff all the way around there on that. John Shaw says, I'm anxious to see a scrimmage game. Yeah, boy, me too. Me too. Amos Williams says he actually watched a couple Jamie Newman's game. I know this kid can ball. I also saw Daniels and wasn't that impressed. Yeah, so I'm going to try to split the difference here on this and kind of thread the needle. I think there's plenty of reasons to be impressed with Jamie Newman, even though his Wake Forest career wasn't perfect. I think there's also still plenty of reason to think that JT Daniels is a terrific prospect, even though his freshman season may have been a little shaky. USC programs was an absolute mess that year. I think they're in much better hands with Graham Harrell calling the offensive plays. And I don't believe that Daniels is necessarily all that much less of a prospect because he didn't have a great freshman season. If anything, someone who's played, to me, makes him more of a prospect than he would have been. My bigger concern for Daniels would not be the shaky freshman year when he was very young by comparison to the typical freshman. I'd be more concerned about the injury recovery. But nonetheless, I think there's reason to like both guys. Randy Hall predicting Terrence Ferguson or Deion Colsey is the next UGA commit, it looks like. That'd be fun to think about. David Harvey says, for some reason we refuse to get a quarterback who can extend the play and have some escapability. It's like, I just don't understand. So let me speak to that, David. First of all, that is what Jamie Newman is, and I'm telling you. And if I end up being wrong about this, then you can call me out then. But do not assume that JT Daniels came here to run Jamie Newman out of town. Just don't assume that. I mean, I think predicting what the NCAA is going to do on this is tricky. I'm a big believer. Let me try to sort of succinctly explain my point on this. The NCAA went hog wild with transfers a year or so ago because I think they were very worried about their public perception, their standing in the sports world. They were concerned about that. People had kind of just turned on the amateurism model. But now that they've softened their stance on name, image, and likeness, I don't think they feel quite as much motivation to soften their stance on liberal transfer policy anymore. We saw this just the other day when they had one of those fancy pants meetings. They tabled the notion of one-time free transfer and yet are going forward with plans to allow players to profit off their name, image, and likeness. Their concession to players as a way to prevent amateurism from eroding anymore is more along name, image, and likeness lines than it is the transfer stuff. So I don't feel like the NCAA has as much of a motivation to just like wildly grant these transfers because they feel like they're giving everybody a lollipop in the form of name, image, and likeness. That's my opinion on that anyway. So I think that Daniels may have a little bit of a climb if he wants to be eligible this season. But the idea of using your legs to be escapable, I mean, that's what Georgia brought Jamie Newman in to do, and Georgia's more than happy, I think, to have that as part of its profile. The idea that Daniels is a different kind of player, I'm telling you on this, I firmly believe this to be true. There's more than one way to be a good quarterback. 129 other teams in Division I football, FBS level football, there's not a single one of them that's going to turn down JT Daniels because he's not mobile enough. No one's going to do that. And you compare him to certain quarterbacks, the extra mobility they may have is certainly a weapon they can use. I'm not saying that it's not, but in terms of Daniels being more of a traditional quarterback, no one's turning him down for that reason. It's just not. It's just not. Cagney Parker, thanks for the kind words on the slip in there. Appreciate that. Steve Highland, I agree with his point that Newman, he says, is a grown-ass man. That's going to be a big difference. I do think that experience matters. I'm not telling you that Newman will be as good as Joe Burrow was a year ago. That may be impossible. In fact, I've seen some stats over the last couple of days that probably indicate just how unreal it is to go from 1 year's worth of performance to the next, the way that Joe Burrow did. But I do believe that Burrow's age helped him. I do. And Newman being a little older, a graduate from a fancy pants private school like Wake Forest, I think that's all very helpful for him in that regard. James Crump has an interesting idea. He says, I hope getting JT Daniels is going to flip Mario Williams from Oklahoma. Now you're talking, James. Now we're having fun. I love that idea. I don't know if it can happen, but I like the idea of thinking about it. Let me do a few more on Facebook. I knew we'd have good comments today. Thus far we are. Phil Rogers says Coach Monken has to coach all of them. Quarterback, coach them all up and see who wins the job. Phil, I think you're right. Todd Monken's name is still the most important name we're to discuss, as I said before. And listen, different people can have differing opinions. I acknowledge that. But I'm a firm believer that the MVP of the LSU national championship was Joe Brady, not Joe Burrow. I just firmly believe, because we see so many of the same players year over year, and all of them had dramatically different statistical outcomes. Jamar Chase went from 46th in the SEC in receiving in 2018 to the Biletnikoff Award winner in 2019. Clyde Edwards-Helaire went from being, backup running back to 1,400 yards. Joe Burrow went from, quality starter to, whichever quarterback you want to compare him to. And I believe that Joe Brady was the catalyst for all of that. And so ultimately, whether we're talking about, Daniels, or we're talking about Newman, or we're talking about Vandegrift, or any of the other quarterbacks in the Georgia roster, it's not their job to make Georgia great. It's Georgia's job to make them great. That's where Todd Monken steps in here. And if Monken does his job in that regard, if Buster Faulkner does his job in that regard as a lieutenant to Monken, then you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. As James mentioned a moment ago, you're going to get the Mario Williams at the receiver position. You're going to get the future quarterbacks, the Gunnar Stocktons, the whomever else, because all of a sudden this becomes a program where guys come to get the coaching they want. I mean, players for the most part want to be coached up. They do believe that there are coaches that can unlock their full potential. They want to be coached up. You don't really see that many players who step on a college campus assuming they already have it all figured out. And so it's Georgia's job to make sure they coach them up there. And unfortunately, and listen, I don't have great joy in saying this because I liked the guy, and certainly I obviously cheer for the program, but James Coley just didn't get it done. And Georgia did what successful organizations do. Once they realized that, they acted quickly, and Todd Monken is the result. All right, a couple more here. We've got to go to YouTube too. Try to knock out 5 more minutes. Marshall Fleming says that he did redshirt last year because of the injury, meaning Daniels. NCAA doesn't usually make kids sit out 2 years when he played 1 or 2 years already. That was certainly the precedent that was in place, a couple of years ago. Demetrius Robertson comes to mind on that after he missed the 2017 season, most of that with an injury. Let's just see. Let's just see where we are on that for right now. I want to be clear. This is my opinion, and my opinion obviously has a very good chance of being wrong, but that's kind of where my opinion is for now. Stephen Venanzi, who played some football, says while playing at Towson each year, every position had transfers and at least 3 guys that could have started at other schools. This talent, I believe, made us better and will do the same for UGA quarterback. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, no matter who ends up emerging here, Georgia will have been better for having 5 quarterbacks than would have had by having 4. Whether the 5 includes Newman this year or Vandergriff next season, you're just better off for that. Gohan Rice talking about some of the schedule stuff. I mean, it is interesting to start thinking about, in addition to Clemson, who Georgia really has. I'm not sure who Georgia's crossover game in 2021 is. I'm not sure about that. Arkansas? Sam Pittman. Wow, how about that? That'll be kind of fun. Maybe more reasons than one. Is that in Fayetteville or in Athens? Okay. So yeah, Arkansas, I'm told, is the crossover game for 2021. Dallas Schwartz, who, by the way, is a California guy, says, BA, no matter when JT gets to play, he will be a good one for you. JT to Pickens for touchdowns is going to be a regular call on your TV and radio. Well, you love the idea of that. That's fun to think about. That is really fun. Pardon me for the ringing there. Let's get a couple more here. Huck Finn, as per usual, talking up someone like Kyle Trask. Dallas Schwartz also said that USC situation in 2018 was a mess. Yeah, boy, it really was. I'm glad to hear the validation on that. William Moore says, after watching highlights from both Newman and Daniels, I would not discount Daniels' ability to win the job if he gets clearance to play. He played in a pro-style offense at USC, which limited. You may be right about that. Obviously, anything can happen. But it's important for me to be clear about my opinion, whether it turns out to be right or wrong. And as clearly as I can state it, I don't think that Daniel's presence here is to be read into that it somehow thinks the program somehow thinks less of Jamie Newman. I don't think that. Now, Newman's not a given to succeed himself, but this is not the way that I take that. On a different topic, by the way, Everlasting Chaos says on YouTube, what do you think the standout performer on the defensive line is going to be? Call me crazy, but I think the big Jordan Davis will have an impressive year. I like Trayvon Walker as well. Dude has caused havoc. Yeah, I've always said before that I think the single best NFL prospect on the roster is probably Trayvon Walker. And I say that with all due respect to some other guys that you could possibly mention there. Jordan Davis is, I think, so close to being so much more also than people realize. Now, I don't think that this is like a, maybe a first-round pick type of prospect or something like that. But last season, he evolved into more than just a run stopper. In his freshman season in 2018, he was a very good run-stopping defensive lineman, something that Georgia just didn't have a ton of other than him. There weren't a lot of guys that could do Jordan Davis' job. Last year, very quietly, he started putting together some other things there as well. I think he's tied for second on the team, 2.5 sacks. This is a guy, and by the way, some of the other sacks and quarterback pressures this team had, you would see a little bit of a collapse on the interior, coming from Jordan Davis, too, that allowed other guys to get to the quarterback. So I think that Davis is kind of on his way to being more than just that space-eating nose guard type player. Now, that's still the most important job that he has in this team, but I do think he's a little bit more than just being that. Crow King 123 says, when Pittman comes to town, love to see people in red and black with the yes sir shirts on. Yeah, listen, I think that Pittman's one of the rare examples of there'll be no animosity with him coming back to Athens. In fact, I do think he'll be well received. There'll be all kinds of hugs on the field, assuming that we're able to touch each other a year from now. But that's one of the rare examples of a guy going to coach somewhere else in the SEC, where even if he has success, I think eventually actually he may have some success there. Georgia fans will still treat him warmly, I believe. Memphis Dog like Jordan Davis a year ago. Yeah, me too. Courtney Fisher says, do you think getting a new starter at the kicker position with less time of transition will affect our team? think there's a chance that it does. A lot of these kickers, even during practice, are kind of working by themselves. So working by yourself during the quarantine, I'm being half kidding, half serious, but working by yourself, getting ready for that is not all that different what they do during practice half the time anyway. I think the competition for that one's going to be a little bit weird because I'm always a believer that the job of place kicking in a game is so different than the job of really anything else. There's nothing at the high school level that prepares you for big full stadiums, that spider camera hanging over your head when you're getting ready to kick. That's just such a different experience. And handling the pressure is, to me, like 90% of the job. So you can have the competition. You can, find the guy with the biggest and best leg. But ultimately, it's how you handle the pressure that determines whether you succeed or not. That's my belief anyway. All right, we're going to get ready to go here. Anybody else got anything to say before we go? P. Rich says wants to see the cornerbacks get more turnovers. Yeah, listen, that group's got a real chance to do a lot of good things. Joel Moody says that Corey Foreman posted on something when JT Daniels committed. That's good news. That's fun to think about. A couple California guys there. All right, we could do this all day long. We'll get ready to go. All right, really good. Mitch Marchman says turning the corner and got a nice succession plan in place for quarterbacks. Love to watch the way that plays out. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Heads up here. Read more about this at ajc.com. But I guess, so the vice president, I believe, is back in the state of Georgia again today, which, you can follow his remarks, whatever he has to say. But this is also a big deal from a traffic standpoint because they close the roads and the vice president or any of the chief executives are in town. So pay close attention to that. ajc.com for more on that. Also, interesting stuff with the Falcons. Alex Mack, the team center, spoke to reporters yesterday. You can follow more of that at ajc.com. And how are restaurants in the Atlanta area rethinking things in the wake of having to deal with the coronavirus? There's really good reporting on that at ajc.com there as well. Get all of your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Thank you for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. Hope you enjoy a great weekend. I'll see you back here again on Monday at 10 a.m. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.